Good morning, colleagues. My name is Presha Ramsarup. I'm from the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. I work at a postgraduate research center, which is known as the Center for Researching Education and Labor. My presentation this morning will be focusing on reframing VET systems towards sustainability. The presentation will essentially focus on providing a rationale for why VET needs to be central to a green transition. It actually looks at different ideas and notions that will frame any response within VET towards a green transition. It pulls out some key terms that we need to look at, and the presentation will end with a focus on ideas for a new model to look at sustainability within VET. So, since VET is located at the interface between education, the labor market, and civil society, it has an important transformative role to play when we examine the relationship between education and work, skills, and livelihoods. As such, because of its role at that interface, it has played an important role on supplying labor for vocations and professions, and has always been aligned as a key generator of economic growth. As such, VET has always been directly implicated in the reproduction of productivism. Productivism can be seen as the dominant idea, which takes for granted that economic growth and paid work are necessary and permanent features of human existence. So this idea of productivism mirrors and uncritically mirrors the dominant logic of industrial society and produces its subjects as compliant and compulsive agents of economic growth. Researchers like Anderson 2018 and other researchers like McGrath and Powell, researchers that are involved in actively trying to construct a new model of VET for Africa, the fourth generation of VET for Africa, have all been trying to highlight this productivist centering of VET and trying to contest it. Okay, now let's talk about the framing of VET. Researchers like McGrath, Margarita Langthaler have argued that vocational education and training have almost been absent from earlier international development frameworks, but Agenda 2030 and the SDGs have caused greater importance to be attached to VET. VET is now seen as an integral part of the education SDGs, and has an important transversal role within global educational transformation. While VET is now and has returned to the global policy table and is an important part of transformative VET and UNESCO strategies, the policy and conceptual debates around VET are still lagging far behind. And that's why it's important for us to think and consider our conceptualizing of VET. The UNESCO TVET strategy, like I've listed on this slide, outlines three key pillars for a new approach to VET. Within the three is one that is extremely important to us and central to this presentation and the others in this theme, and that is facilitating the transition to green economies and green societies. And I'll pick up some of those ideas. So if we think about the transition to a green economy and a sustainable society, how should we be thinking about VET? We have always thought about VET as the relationship between working and learning. And a new framing of VET argues very strongly that if we want to think about a green transition and we want to think about sustainable societies, we need to bring living into that relationship. And they see this new framing as the relationships between living, working, and learning. And that's an important shift, to put living at the center of the relationship between work and learning. Often, the idea of transition to a green economy is interpreted and represented as a jobs discourse, and only an economic discourse. One of the first things that we need to bear in mind, this is much more than a jobs discourse. There are no jobs on a dead planet. We've heard that before. And it's an important idea to keep central when we think about the transition. Yes, it is very important to provide jobs. But the idea of the transition to a green economy is a much bigger discourse. At the center of it are the environmental and social challenges that are facing all life on Earth. And the ideas of decent work for all, well-being and dignity, all of those ideas remain central to the green transition. So, when we talk about the green transition, one of the first ideas that people have trouble with is the idea of what is green then. Does it exclude blue? Does it exclude brown? Does it exclude... Defining green is actually difficult, and we need to acknowledge that. When we're talking about green, are we talking about just the product? Are we talking about the manufacturing of the product? Are we talking about the products and services? So it's important to look at the green transition as a continuum. It's not one single thing. So how does a product and a process, how green does it have to be to count? If a product is environmentally friendly, but it is packaged, delivered and marketed in an unenvironmentally friendly way, is it still green? Do we have to think about the users of products? So this raises just some complexity around the idea of what is green, and raising the notion that defining green is difficult, and we need to consider it carefully in the educational work that we are busy with. There are three types of green definitions that have started to emerge in the literature. The first type is the social justice, worker-centered definition that is very central to the decent work kind of discourse and the just transitioning discourse. The second is the renewable energy and energy efficiency definition of green. That's focused very strongly on renewable energy and energy efficiency. And the third definition that's starting to emerge is the broad environmental definition, which defines green as anything relating to environmental protection and quality. So another aspect of the complexity around the ideas of what is green and what does a green transition mean. In our research work around dimensions of this green transition, there's a few things that have stood out for us. In the way people think about a green transition, we're often seeing very naive and narrow approaches. So people think about, oh, we want to create these green jobs in this sector, but they actually don't question traditional conceptions of production and consumption. So they're talking about a green transition, and they're talking about the creation of green jobs and green training and green skills, but the central notion of production and consumption has actually remained unsustainable. Another key idea that has stood out for us is that largely employers have no idea what we're talking about when we're talking about what is a green job, what is a green transition. So employers and sector associations need to be supported to actually understand the opportunities and possibilities linked to the green transition. In our own research work, when we try to examine which are the areas that require workforce development around the green transition, the three aspects that tend to stand out are things linked to risk, technology, and innovation. a very important concept is that we need to bear in mind that when we talk about the notion of a green job, or when we talk about the notion of greening of work, these are not homogeneous concepts. There is no one type of green job. So it has made it easier for us in our research work to think about green jobs as core green jobs, where the product, the purpose, and the processes of the job are green, to think about emerging green specializations in these traditional jobs, where you look at, there's been significant changes to the tasks and skills that are required, and a specialist role has actually emerged that's strongly linked to sustainability. The third domain here that we look at is traditional jobs that are not generally regarded as green, but there are important possibilities for greening aspects of the job, greening the occupational tasks, and ultimately supporting a greater sustainability, knowledge, and skills within the job and within the job roles. A further aspect when we think about the greening of work or in the greening of an occupation is, what then do we look at? How do we think about how do we green an occupation? Some of the things that we need to consider is the field of knowledge. Are there knowledge changes? Is there specialized sustainability knowledge that needs to be integrated here? Okay. What are the materials the occupation is working with or working on? What are the types of goods and services that are being produced? What are the tools and machineries that the occupation is working with? Those give us some openings to consider how we start to think about the greening of occupations. So, when we think about unlocking the potential of green work, green skills is an important enabling factor to the transition to a green economy. What then are green skills? There are multiple different definitions that are in the literature and in the public domain around green skills. 3 of the most commonly utilized ones are on this slide. I'm just going to flag the second one because it is a very broad definition and it's very widely utilized. Green skills are the technical skills, knowledge, values, and attitudes needed in the workforce to develop and support sustainable social, economic, and environmental outcomes in business, industry, and the community. So it's important to see that it's not a very narrow concept, and it's not linked only to particular types of jobs. So how then are people trying to understand the notion of green skills, and how are they trying to conceptualize how to think about green skills within work? This slide shows you a typology that colleagues at the University of Hong Kong have been working with and have been trialing in different work situations in their projects. So they're looking at a typology that looks at the bottom of the pyramid, one type of green skill is a general sustainability skill, integrating sustainability attitudes and a general sustainability mindset. That's the bottom part. Then the second set of green skills at the next level of it is generic, what they're calling the generic green skills. And generic green skills are green skills within an environmental context and generic technological processes. And both of these, they say, are central to the greening of an occupation. The next level of green skills, they outline from the generic. So if we've got a sustainability mindset, we've tried to integrate some generic environmental green skills, then we look at the topping up skills for greening the existing occupation. What kind of top-up skills is actually needed? And at the final high point, at the apex of their triangle, is the new specific green skills that's required for green core environmental work. So this is how they are working with the idea of green and the integration of green skills across their workforce. So in this slide, we see the work of colleagues from the Brookings Institute in the US, and they are looking at the idea of green skills as a continuum, and that's represented by the red line at the top. So their continuum is thinking about skills for green jobs, okay, that's skills that are linked traditionally within work. Then they're looking at more generic green life skills, and then they move on to skills for a green transformation, and that's the kind of social justice, changing society, transforming unjust social and economic structures with society. So it's that anticipatory thinking about creating a different world. So they're working with the idea that green skills is a continuum from skills for green jobs into skills for transformation. Okay, so what I've tried to do in this presentation is to highlight the rationale for integration of sustainability into VET, and then I've tried to look at a very brief introduction to some of the key ideas that surround the idea of integration of a green transition, green jobs, green work, the types of green jobs, and the types of green skills. Now, to end, I want to make the argument that from the type of productivist framing that I introduced at the top, we need a much deeper transformative transformation of VET. Narrow approaches within VET are seen as greening of institutions, or adding discrete or new modules or programs into VET curricula. But to really reframe VET towards sustainability, we need a much bigger transformation. There is a need for a VET model that takes equity and environmental sustainability into account. And it centrally will question the ideas of production that are central to the framing of VET. Such a model, we argue, involves a much wider framing of the economy. It is beyond the dominant productivist growth and market-based model. It produces sustainable production and consumption, and has far-reaching feminist degrowth and other ecological economics concepts for shaping work, learning, and VET systems. So a fundamental rethinking of the type of model that is central to a VET system. And there are multiple researchers across the world that are working with these kind of ideas, and I've listed some of them for you at the bottom of the slide. So my final parting shot, it's a big idea. We're talking about framing a different kind of model, and what would this different kind of model involve? Drawing from the work in the National Green Skills Program, Rosenberg identified 5 principles and practices that need to be taken into account when working with this identification of green skills. And I think that they may be useful for how we think about the green transition within VET. And I'll just highlight them very quickly. One is we need to expand notions of the economy. We need to look at the economy beyond just the formal economy. 2, we need to expand value chains. Current value chains that have set in place the current mode of production and consumption are unsustainable. Central to a reframing of VET will be questioning value chains. 3 is we need to think about it much more holistically. We don't just need technical skills and competencies. We need relational as well as transformational. So we need to examine the relationship between technical, relational, and transformational. 4th principle is that we need to think at multiple levels. We can't just think about forming a new training program and insert that in the curriculum and not think about the training of educators. How will that program be sustained? What are the learning pathways for people that step out of that program? Where are they going to work? How does the labor market interpret, and what does it signal to the labor market? So we need to be able to think about it at these multiple levels. And the fifth point is that it's important to think regionally, to not just think in this aspirational way, but to have a concrete regional focus when we start to think about green skills. So thank you very much. I hope I've given you some ideas on the ideas of transitioning the VET systems to a more sustainable system, or a system that actually places sustainability at the center of its framing for VET. Thank you.